So, an official welcome to Horst Simon, a good friend and colleague for a number of years. We both were in England as lecturers, he at London, I at Newcastle, but we really got to know each other over interviewing for the DAAD. So we've picked together some of the DAAD lectoren who have been teaching you, and it was always a particular joy to listen to Horst quizzing the candidates. I particularly remember the questions about the difference between Konjunktiv 1 and Konjunktiv 2, where you always managed to formulate the questions in a way that they included the special form of subjunctive you were asking about. And that's something we shared, the joy in the wit of linguistics and how to play with language. And forms of address is one way to really play with language, and it's a form of a very high skill to find the right address for the right moment in time. And what we are going to do today in the lecture is do a historische Durchzieher, so look from how to address people has changed from Old High German times to the 21st century. And there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end, since it's something that is really relevant also for your year abroad experience to get the forms of address exactly right. It's part of this lecture series of topics in historical linguistics. We started last week with looking at Bible translation. And if you remember the example that Luther used in his Sendbrief vom Dolmetschen is the address that the angel Gabriel does when he or they meets Mary for the first time. And Luther picked that particular moment because he knew it would be something that would hit hard with his opponents. So it's a very intimate moment, and how you address somebody revealing they are actually pregnant by God is something that carries weight. So he wanted, instead of Gegrüßet seist du Maria voll Gnaden, he wanted that the angel called her Liebe Maria, holdselige Maria, but in any case, it's this intimate du that the angel is using when meeting Mary for the first time. And what I've also posted on Canvas, and which you see now here on the slide, are two lectures from a lecture series that Horst Simon organized last year, which link the forms of address also to courtliness, to Höflichkeit, a very interesting concept. We could discuss that, the Middle High German roots of what höfisch, höflich means. So that gives you an opportunity to look further into that. Next week, we'll talk with a grand old man of German linguistics in the UK, Professor Martin Durrell from Manchester. Will actually pre-record that lecture on Monday. So you don't have to get up on Friday at 9 a.m. You can, we'll post it in advance on Canvas. And the week after that, we'll talk about language purism with another former colleague from Britain who is now returned to Germany. The first step in our linguistic journey across forms of address is the Old High German period, and Luise will start us off. And Carolin, if you, yeah, good.
Thank you, Henrike. Yeah, so I will start with the Old High German pronouns of address, and the person you can see in the image, which is actually taken from our 15th century manuscript, so later than Old High German, but still the person you can see is Bishop Salomo of Constance, which is the first person we know for sure was addressed with the second person singular ear in German. And I will explain now in detail how and why that happened. So if you go to the next slide, please. So thank you. So the differentiated forms of address in German, so everything that goes further than the second person singular, so the du, for a single person, were developed in the 9th century, or at least the first sources we have from this time. So Old High German, the Old High German period. And the first use of ihr, the second person plural, to address a single person was, or can be found in a letter by Otfrid of Weißenburg. You might know Otfrid of Weißenburg as the author of the Old High German or a Old High German Gospel Harmony. And he wrote this letter to his teacher, Bishop Salomo of Constance, and he's talking about his Gospel Harmony and asking his teacher for advice. And you can see part of the letter on the right side. So next slide, please. Thank you. If we're looking at the letter in detail, so at this part of the text, I'll shortly read and translate it. Lexach der Burchi iusent in Swaburichi, dass ihr chiaset überall, ober sie fruma wesan skal, ober ihr hier findet jawicht des, das würdig ist des Lesernes. So you might already understand the content, but Otfrid is here asking, first saying that he sent this part of the book to his teacher, then asking his teacher to read it and to say if he finds anything that is worth of reading. So asking him for advice if his work is good. And you can see in red, I marked the pronouns of address, so you, ihr, and ihr. All of them second person plural, dative and nominative. And he uses them to address a single person, which he probably took from Latin, where the pluralis reverentia is used, also second person plural. And it was used to show the worship for another person and kind of expressing social distance, in opposite to the intimate relation that is expressed if you're using the du, which Henrike explained before. And also interesting is that Otfrid is not using the ear at any point is in his gospel harmony, so he really just uses it in real life to address his teacher. And in the gospel harmony, the du is probably used in the sense of the biblical du that is, for one, the more conservative form, but also the more intimate form. In contrast, I want to show you also another Old High German text, the Hildebrandslied, written Old Saxon and Old High German, where a father, Hildebrand, and a son, Hadubrand, are facing each other in battle. And at first, they don't recognize each other. Then at the end, the father recognizes it's his son, but this is another story. They both use du at the beginning, although they don't know yet that they are related, which you can see in the text on the next slide. Edo welches knosles du sis, ibudi mi inan sages, ik mi die odre vet, hind in kuning Grieche, hut ist mir all ihr mindeot. So Hildebrand asks Hardubrand, so his opponent in battle, before the battle, to tell him about his descent. So he asks about his ancestry and tells him, if you're telling me about your ancestry, I will know who you are because I know everyone in this kingdom. And they're using the du, so in opposite to what Otfrid used, the ear, which is which shows that the text is probably using the more conservative forms, but also that during the Old German period, both singular and plural forms were used, and but we can actually say that mostly about the written text, because of course we don't have any sources about the spoken language. But this is also why the next text example is especially interesting. The Altdeutsche or Pariser Gespräche. Again, you see a page of a manuscript on the right side. So the Altdeutsche Gespräche are kind of showing travel vocabulary. So it's a collection of useful sentences you can use during your travels through a German-speaking area. And this is why it is an important source, because it seems very close to orality. So it really gives sentences that you could use while you're traveling. And only 2 occurrences of ear can be found. I want to show you one of them, which is actually showing the opposition of ear and du in one dialogue. So as you can see here, quasqueten era, iquid digitis vos, cores dunara, auscultam voll. So you can see also the opposition of the Old High German on the left and Latin on the right. So you always have the German version and then the translation Latin. And I've marked again the pronouns in red. So the first one, yeah. So which is actually linguistically interesting, the G at the beginning is probably pronounced more as a J, so yeah, because it's the semi-vowel from Germanic descent. And so the first sentence says, "What are you saying, sir?" So someone is addressing a person with higher social status and using the plural form. And the answer is, "You listen, fool." So the sir is speaking back to the person addressing him, and using the singular form, with again shows the use of the second person plural to address someone with a higher social status, and shows also the opposition, that the pronouns could be used to show for yourself, to show how you think you're standing in social rank in opposition to another person. And yeah, here are some more examples from the Pariser Gespräche, just to show you a little bit that because it's actually kind of difficult, linguistically difficult text, because it's mixing up many different dialects and kind of has a Latin influence also on the writing of the Old High German. So for example, you can see what you've also seen on the slide before, the writing of GU for W, which shows you that that it's more written how you pronounce it than following any writing conventions or something, but I won't go into detail here now. next to Henrike will tell us something about middle. Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course I have the conclusion slide. I forgot about that. So yeah, as I said, the second person plural was used to address nobility and clergy. It was taken from Latin, and the social status seems to be the determining factor here in the choice of plural or singular person. But we also can see both forms, so both pronouns of address used during the Old High German period. So it seems that there were no strict regulations yet, and the whole system just started to develop.
Yeah, and then I have a very brief look at one of the key texts you're studying for paper 9, the Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach, which has now a courtly setting with high importance being laid on to address people correctly. And you see here the two half-brothers, Feirefitz, who is the son of Gachmuret and Belakane, a queen of Arabia, and then his younger brother Parzival, whose mother Herzeleude married Gachmuret later. And they, a bit like you remember the Hildebrandslied, where relatives first meet in battle, but now in a courtly setting and a tournament setting, the default form would be ihr. And so they start addressing each other as ihr, but then Feirefitz realizes that it's actually his half-brother, and so he asks him to switch over from ihr to du. And it's still a social norm that the older person has to offer the du to the younger person. Du sprach der Rieche Feirefitz. Jupiter hat sienen Vlies, wer der Held geleget an dich. Du sollt nicht mehr irzen mich. Wir hätten beide doch einen Vater. Mit bruderlichen Trühen bat er, dass er Irzens ihn erlierse und in Duzen liche hierse. So that he should stop saying ihr, plural, to him, and instead address him as du. Du rede was Parzivale leid. Der sprach, Bruder, your Riechheit. Riechheit doesn't just mean being rich, but power, status, your status. So he still uses the ü. Geliechet wohl dem baroque sich. So it's as you are as powerful and of a high status like Oriental Prince. So sieht ihr älter auch, denn ich. So, and you're also older. Min Jugend und min Armut soll solcher Losheit sien behurt. So I should beware of such loose manners, of such disregard of proper decorum, dass ich ü duzen biete. So I won't go there that I should start saying du to you. Svenne ich mich züchten jette. So he, Parzival has been brought up with some fatal consequences in always paying attention to the decorum. If you've already read the Parzival, you might remember that he fails to ask the proper question at the Gralsburg because he has been told not to speak if not being asked to speak, and that then leads to a prolonging of the suffering of the Grals king. So, and here again, he follows rather the Zucht, the Erziehung, the proper upbringing, than doing the kind of natural familiar thing. There is more to it, and you can read up on it in Parzival. I'll now hand over to Horst, who will take us through another Middle High German example before then leading us into the more via early modern German into the present time. Over to you, Horst.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today on this occasion. I have very fond memories of paper 4 at Oxford, because it was even before your time, Henrike, in exactly 10 years ago, that I took the train from London to Oxford every week to give a lecture series on paper 4. So I'm glad to be back now on this particular topic. However, well, it's only via video, so it's a bit disappointing in that sense, but nonetheless better than nothing. So yeah, there's so many things that can be said about the history of pronouns of address. Can write whole books about it. So what I will do now is, because I will have very few minutes, I will look at two aspects of pronouns of address and their history that are important, I think, from a systematic point of view. So not so much in terms of chronological sequence, but where I feel that they have some systematic aspects to them that might be surprising, maybe. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the Nibelungenlied, another Middle High German text, same period as the Parzival, and in a sense, and they say, to simplify somewhat, the distribution between du and ihr is social linguistically pretty simple. Well, if you want to simplify, you say that upper class people say ihr to each other and lower class people say du to each other. And you're entitled to receive an ihr if you're a noble person, and you are not entitled to use to receive an ihr, so you only get a du if you're a lower class person. However, there's also intimacy and knowing each other as another factor that comes into play. And the interesting thing here, you see the significance of that at the very end of what I'm saying, is that it's not always entirely clear. In any given diet, any given speaker addressee combination, things can change much more than they can change in contemporary German. So what you see here is one excerpt of a conversation between two kings in the Nibelungenlied, so Gunther and Siegfried. They talk to each other, and because both of them are kings, both of them use ihr at the beginning of the conversation. And it's a very difficult situation they're in. It's the meeting they have after the wedding, this famous wedding night with problematic occurrences. And what's happening here is Gunther and Siegfried are talking about these difficulties that happened in the wedding night. And they start out with ihr because they're kings, and then they switch over to du. And at a certain point in the conversation, and they address each other as du. The important thing is, and it doesn't always occur in the same period in the sequence of the dialogue in the various manuscripts. The good thing is we have about the Nibelungenlied is we have lots of manuscripts, and 3 of them are very old ones from the early 13th century. So manuscripts A, B, and C, that all of them had their own traditions later on with further manuscripts. And the interesting thing is that each of these manuscripts has to change from the ihr to the du at another point in the sequence of turns in the conversation. So in manuscript C, Gunther switches to du at a certain point, and Siegfried immediately replies with the du. In the manuscript A, Gunther uses the du much earlier in the conversation, whereas Siegfried much later. So what you see here is there is an inconsistency across the manuscripts about when the change from ihr to du occurred. If you imagine, it's the same, it's exactly the same story. Everything is exactly the same in the 3 manuscripts. However, those 3 writers of those manuscripts found it appropriate at different points when the switch from ihr to du should occur, which tells us that what I said is this mixed style of using du and ihr in one speaker addressee combination. This mixing of different pronouns was fluid in a sense, and you could use it for pragmatic purposes to convey a special meaning. Something like in this case, it's an embarrassing situation we're talking about. So it's kind of male bonding occurring, and also something like it's a very intimate topic we're talking about. So now let's do that in du. But when you do it, all three of those manuscripts do it at a different point. If you now switch on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so you see this inconsistency happening there. Now let's move on many centuries later. Completely different social setting, cultural setting, everything's different, also different pronoun. This is much more modern. This is mid-18th century. So a long period, lots of things happened in between in terms of address. But the important thing here is you have people saying sie to each other. That's already the modern German polite pronoun sie happening in this particular dialogue here. And what you see is that's an excerpt from what I call Comédie larmoyante, so weinerliches Lustspiel is the German term for that. Mid-18th century drama. They're supposed to be comedies, and not all of them are terribly funny, but well, that's what they consider to be interesting literature in the 18th century. And the particular story I chose for today is that there is a situation is the following. There are two young women, Christianchen and Lorchen, and both are in love with Herr Simon. And in the world of this particular text, the idea is that the male can decide whom he would like to marry. So it's Herr Simon's chance to choose between those two women. And because they're all middle-class bourgeois people, they all say sie to each other throughout the whole text, basically. However, there's one scene where there's a change. So what we see here is that Christianchen says, fürchten Sie, and she talks to Lorchen, her friend. They're good friends, and they're both competing for Herrn Simon. So she says, fürchten Sie nichts, ich kenne Ihr redlich Herz, entdecken Sie uns Ihr Verlangen, die Mama möchte sonst kommen. And then just a couple of lines later on, she says, dir redlich Kind soll ich deinen Liebsten rauben, dies kannst du mir zumuten. So what's happening here is Christianchen sacrifices herself and says, well, you can have him. I'm your good friend, but I can't steal Herrn Simon from you, so have him. You can have him. Because I like you so much as my friend, I take a step back and he's yours. So it's a very highly emotional situation. And in this particular situation, she uses du. Later on, she said, next scene, they say sie again, because then it's a less emotional situation of sie. But now, in this emotional setting, you use du. If you look at other dramas of this, I looked at several of those texts in comedies mid-18th century. You see this in every drama. There's at least one or two scenes where this happens. So if there's a quarreling and you want to accuse somebody, normally you're on du terms because you're friends, but now you want to accuse, you are a liar, then you say sie. Only for two turns, you say sie. Because you want to accuse somebody of being a liar, or if you want to assert common ground, or if you want to cajole somebody into doing something. In those particular instances, you can use either one or the other of those forms. The one that you do not normally use, the other form that you use, just by changing the pronoun, you change the situation and you use it as a pragmatic device. Now, next slide, please. Okay, so this was the idea of fluidity and a certain opportunities of variation in your pronouns. Now, something completely different. Let's move back a bit in time into mid-17th century Baroque complexities. This was a period where another, I think, structurally interesting thing happened in German pronouns, in German address, I should say. And this was the period when you would address somebody with nominal abstractions if you want to be very polite. Normally, you can say sie or ihr, singular, various forms get ihr. But if you want to be very polite, use one of those abstractions. And it depends on who you're talking to, which one you're going to use. So if you're talking to the highest nobility, you say Euer Majestät. If you talk to a Catholic priest, you say Euer Hochwürden. If you talk to me, you would have to say Euer Hochgelahrtheit or Euer Weisheit, because this is my most important abstract part of my identity. So you're looking at your addressee and the particular I'm losing the word. You look at the traits of your addressee, and the most important trait is the one that you address when you talk to this person. So that's one aspect. The interesting thing, this has a grammatical effect. If we look at the next slide, this is an excerpt from a drama by Andreas Gryphius, exactly mid-17th century, and it's about the Bishop of London, Juxon, that's it, what it really was called, and Charles I, the one who was beheaded. Tomorrow will be the day of his beheading, 370 years ago. And Juxon speaks to the male person, Charles. Charles is a male person, and the bishop says, "Der höchste werter Fürst woll ihn den Tag anblicken." And the ones in boldface are address forms. These are forms referring to the addressee. So he says, "Werter Fürst woll ihn den Tag anblicken." Wir glauben, dass wird uns seinen Knecht erquicken. Drückt Ihre Majestät noch ein verborgen Leid? Wir finden uns getrost und zu der Not bereit. Hat sie der kurzen Nacht genossen sonder Sorgen? So what you see here is, hat sie der kurzen Nacht genossen? That's third person singular feminine, used in addressing a male person, Charles I. Why is that so? Because this sie takes up anaphorically as an anaphoric pronoun the Ihre Majestät in the turn before. So Ihre Majestät is taken up with the feminine pronoun, third person feminine pronoun sie. So what you see here is it's a situation of politeness. You want to be very polite to the king, so Ihre Majestät. But because Ihre Majestät is grammatically feminine, you use the feminine pronoun even if the supposed sex of the addressee is male. And you see a polite sex-gender mismatch. This happened quite often in the mid-17th century in German. Later, because all of those nominal abstractions, Majestät, Gnade, Ehre, Hoheit, Gelehrtheit, are all feminine nouns. The feminine pronouns were used quite often when talking to male persons. However, only in the mid-17th century. Only slightly later, they changed it in the idea that male persons will be addressed with the masculine form and female persons with the feminine form. They somehow realigned the sex-gender distinction. This particular, this particular sex-gender thingy is something that's actually is very little research on that. It happens today. If you look at other languages, like for instance, contemporary, modern Hebrew or modern Arabic, just investigated that, they have the same thing. They have two pronouns of address for two pronouns, second person singular pronouns, masculine and feminine, and that's regular in the grammar. So in modern Semitic language, all Semitic languages, you have this gender distinction in second person singular pronouns, and you can use the wrong pronoun to convey a particular special meaning, either politeness or impoliteness. So if you use the feminine pronoun towards a woman, you make her more of a more important person, namely a male person. Therefore, it's conceived to be polite to use the masculine pronoun towards a woman. On the other hand, if you use the feminine pronoun towards a man, this is, well, something like a symbolic castration or whatever is happening there. You somehow say that this is not a real person, a real proper man, it's only a woman, and therefore you use the feminine pronoun, and this is considered to be impolite. So there are various ways where politeness and sex-gender distinctions come into play. Now, this is a slide I don't want to talk about. I don't want to confuse it too much for today.
Sorry?
No, just leave it. What you see in this particular slide is the whole story. Too much for today. But if you want to read out, there's books written about exactly this topic, about the gradual stepwise expansion of the system. As we heard earlier today, it starts out with only a do, then in Old High German, in Middle High German, you have the do and the ear, and then move on, and until at the very end, somewhere in the 19th century, it collapses, and you get to the modern contemporary do-see distinction. So that's the idea of the rising complexity and over-complexification, if you like, the German pronominal system, which in the end came up with our contemporary, again, opposition, distinction between two forms. Now for the next slide, please. First today, and that's the difference to what we had at the beginning. At the beginning, you had a do and the ear. Now we have a do and the see. That's one aspect, different grammatical forms, the ear and the see. That's one thing. But also the important thing, and I think that's what I hope to tell you when I talked about the Nibelungenlied, as well as about this mid-18th century drama, the Lorch and Simon story. Back then, the opposition was not strict. You could manipulate the forms, whether you use one form or the other, had pragmatic effects, had something to do with the conversational flow that you had. Whereas today, and that's I think the last aspect for today is it's strict. If today you meet somebody and you're either on C terms or you're on do terms, and then that's basically what you're keeping for a long period of time. You can switch from C to do at a certain point, but then you have to stick to it. You can't do in contemporary German. You start out with somebody you don't know, C, and then if you know somebody better, you might switch over to do at a certain point, but then you stay with it. You don't go back in the next sentence and say C again, or if you're angry, you all of a sudden say C. In German today, there's a very strict opposition. And there's also a grammatical story behind this, but this I will spare you that. I've written a whole book about that. The idea is that contemporary German do and see are in that sense grammatically very different from what happened back in the old days. And the final slide might be, yeah, if you want to read about that, about the diachronie of that is in chapter 4 of a book I wrote a couple of years ago. And if you want to have a short version where the same story is told, but in much more concisely and easier to digest, maybe, is chapter 7.3 in the famous, I'd say the best historical linguistics textbook of German by Damaris Nübling and her colleagues. And if there's anything else you want to know, you can send me an email. That's probably.
Many thanks, and brilliant to have this run through under the aspect of really switching between the forms, which I find an absolutely fascinating aspect. And just to one anecdote, I'm not sure how it's handled today, but the when to change from Sie to Du is really relevant for translators from German into English. So how do you handle dialogue when translating? And I was told that the German publishers would instruct their English translators to switch in the 70s from Sie to Du after the first kiss only. I'm not sure whether this has been moved to an earlier part, because these are moving boundaries, really, when you make the move over from Sie to Du.
Yeah.
And
you can use this in literature, actually. There's a nice scene in a novel by Theodor Fontane, where, again, two middle-class young people are on C terms with each other. And then there's a chapter end, and then next page, another chapter, and they talk again and they say do. And as a reader, you know, something must have happened in between.
Yeah.
You're never told, they never say what's happening there, but something must have happened between the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next chapter, because the switch from see to do has occurred. And in the end, it turns out that it's what they all it's heterosexual society, so it's what you expect in a situation like that.
Yeah.
So exactly, the do-see distinction can be used for literary purposes in various ways, and it's indeed difficult to translate in a language like English, which is one of those few languages where you don't have a distinction.
I have put in one further slide because Yoko Tawada was as writer-in-residence in Oxford 3 years ago, and for Japanese it's similar to Hebrew, even more complex. So you change the way you refer to yourself also when you change the way to refer to your opposite number. And she thematizes this in several of her poems in a book which I can highly recommend called Die Abenteuer der deutschen Grammatik. So I'll just read one of these. Als ich dich noch siezte, sagte ich und meinte damit mich. Seit gestern duze ich dich, weiß aber noch nicht, wie ich mich umbenennen soll. And I think that captures quite nicely that change of form of address isn't just something grammatical. It changes the whole chemistry of a relationship and requires you to redefine your own concept of yourself. I won't read the other questions, the other poems, just to have a bit of time for questions. I see Carolin has unmuted herself, so over to you to ask something.
Thank you very much. Now I'm quite tempted to address Horst with our Hochgelehrtheit, but I would say that would be totally inappropriate to do so. But I definitely have a question, because even I, as a native speaker in German, are sometimes quite confused which pronoun is actually correct, especially when you have a first-time meeting with someone who is actually at the same age with you, at the same social position. But recently, when I entered a shop, a bakery store actually, I heard people saying, habt ihr noch ein Brot? And actually this ihr was quite obviously referring to the lady who sold the bread, but it was phrased as some kind of plural experience to hide that you would actually use do in this way. So is that a kind of using a pronoun, a plural pronoun here, to cover the insecurities of which pronoun do or see you actually would use in the situation? Do you get
Can I jump in here, because it's something I found fascinating when I came to Tübingen. And there Malga Reis, the professor of historical linguistics, used the second person plural to distinguish between addressing a group of people she would politely address from addressing a single person she would politely address. So she, if she had a group of students there, she would say ihr when she meant the whole group. She would say sie when she meant a single person within the group. And I was never quite sure whether it was just her peculiar way of making some linguistic fun, whether it was something Southern German that the ear survives. But yeah, Horst and I both share a Bavarian Abitur, and so
yeah, I mean, now look at you can look at it from a point of view of linguistic markedness. So first to Henrike's question, then coming back to Carolin's. So you have two grammatical distinctions, so to speak. You have the politeness one, and you have the number, singular plural. So you have 4 cells in the paradigm, but you only have 3 forms. You have do, ihr, and sie. And so you take a language like Spanish, you have 4 forms. You have tú and vosotros in not polite, and you have 2 polite forms, usted and ustedes. So in Spanish, you have four cells in the paradigm and 4 forms. So simple. In German, you only have 3 forms. So what do? And you can neutralize either one or the other of those forms. You can either say, and that's more the Northern German version, to say, I'm interested in the du, ihr in the singular, and whenever I address somebody as polite, the du, ihr in the informal version, and if I want to be polite, I say sie, both to one person or to more persons, but then this blurs the singular plural distinction. If you're in North German, if you're polite, you say sie, and the number of addressees is not relevant anymore. In the Southern German version of, say, colloquial Southern German, it's the other way around. There they say the number distinction is quite important. So I say either du, I say either du to one person, or I say ihr to more than one person. And in the plural, I say either, I'm confused. If I want to be
polite, you say sie in the singular, but also ihr in the
Also,
plural.
yeah, exactly, that's the point. Exactly. That way, your politeness distinction is less important than the number distinction for Southern Germans. So that's the grammatical story behind this, so to speak. And this obviously this makes causes various problems when Northern and Southern German speakers mix, because Northern Germans will find the ear as inappropriate in a polite context, whereas for Southerners it's just a means of conveying plurality and the number distinction. So that's one of those things to be kept in mind. Now coming back to Carolin and the shop ear. Yeah, exactly. There are various situations where you don't exactly know what to use. And well, first of all, there's no correct way of doing it anyway. So on the one hand, I'd say, let's be relaxed about all these things. We all make mistakes, so to speak, or put it the other way. What you do is you, when two people meet, they might have different conceptions of the situation or of the social distinctions that are relevant in the particular situation, and therefore there might be different ways of doing it in a particular dyad between speaker and addressee. But also there are ways to get out of that. You can if you don't know what you want to say, see or do, you only speak in the passive. Then you only use passives. You don't have to refer to the addressee, and then you wait what the other person says, and then use the same form as the other person. So you get a symmetrical relationship, and that's fine. And you found a way out of this distinction between the do and the see. And if you can't use the passive all the time, another option would be to say ihr, which somehow neutralizes all these things. And actually in Berlin, this is an area where in the 19th century still they had the third person singular ear, see singular, as a polite way of addressing somebody. And even today you can hear, actually a couple of years ago I heard that a shopkeeper used to address me as ear. He asked something like, hat noch Flaschen dabei, or something, talking to me. And this was a way of exactly having a way out of that. It's a shop that I go to quite regularly, so it's somehow a do situation. On the other hand, we don't know each other, but it's Kreuzberg, so we don't know what to use. So we say ear as an opportunity to not be pinned down on one or the other of those forms.
Exactly. Now that also makes sense to me, because I'm from West Germany. I'm from Dortmund actually, but happen to live in Freiburg. And exactly this happens. Actually, one of my supervisors had a second student, and we worked closely together. And he always said, Moritz and Carolin, geht ihr mal kurz irgendwo hin? And I was sometimes quite confused whether this was now a do or a sie situation. But then he would switch back to Carolin, können Sie etwas tun? And that was so many different layers of pronouns and politeness and numbers. So there are actually some confusing parts to it. But I mean, I think the thing is you could also use first name plus sie or first name plus du. So they're very different ways of actually conveying politeness or distance or closeness.
Yeah, if you like, say, Henrike mentioned the Japanese case. You can see it in various ways. You can either say Japanese is particularly bad language because it's very complicated, all those different forms, and not only have lots of pronouns, but also have suffixes and various syntactic constructions in order to convey politeness. So it's very confusing and very difficult to learn, and to actually also for Japanese people to acquire the regular system. On the other hand, the good thing, if you like, is it gives opportunities to make very fine-grained distinctions between very polite, super polite, and over super polite, and not so polite. In a language like German, you only have two forms, the do and the sie. So it's, in a sense, it's much more difficult to convey nuances. And one way out is to combine it with particular naming strategies, like, as you said, either the first name or the say. There are people who say second person singular du and combine it with Frau Müller, but also the other way around. You say sie and Henrike in order to get some more nuances. However, I should say this mixing of various pronouns and noun and nominal names. Name types is only done by certain, as you say, certain social classes, if you like. So I would never do that. For me, I'm a very simple person. I'm very simple-minded. I say either do or see, and combine this either with first name or second name. The idea for me would be that everybody is, most people would say, if you don't know anybody, you say see, but if you have some kind of commonality in whatever respect, I'm Dudes person, so I would immediately switch over to do if we have something in common. Of course, there are cases where there are conflicts of social roles. Like, for instance, somebody you are certainly on C terms with, somebody you work with, or some whatever person, you know somebody and you are on C terms. Now you need the same person at a private birthday party, and you meet in the kitchen with your bottle and people talk and smoke, and everybody says do to each other because everybody knows each other. But there's this one person I don't know, because I do know this person, but this a C person because we've known each other in the C context for many years. So what do? Do you single out this particular person by saying C and do to everybody else? Or do you say that the situation is more important? The idea that this is now a special situation, birthday party, kitchen. Okay, here we say do, and then we switch back to C again. Neither works. One thing is awkward, but doing the other thing is awkward as well. So these are the things where you just have to live with a certain awkwardness and a certain problematic way of using language, and then you can change it. And that's how Henrike framed it at the very beginning. You can see this as problematic, but you can also see this as a resource to be playful with language and to say that we don't take these things too seriously anyway. So we use one form or the other, and unless the other person is a particularly bad-mannered person or somebody who wants to be a malign person, otherwise they will accept it as a playfulness and as a language resource we can use to define and to redefine our common life and our commonalities and our social relations. And that's part of the fun of being a human being, to play around with these things.
Is it all right if we go on for another 5 minutes? Yeah. So I know Luise will ask something, but I just wanted to jump in with one anecdote on this particular point, because when I first came to Tübingen, the Neuphilologische Fakultät was deeply divided. So the Literaturwissenschaftler would all be on Sie terms, the linguists would all be on Du terms, because they had been to international conferences together and had switched to English, and switched to English with first name address forms, and then switched back to German, taking the Christian name and aligning it to Du. So, I went to a birthday party of a linguist, and there met Tilman Berger, the professor of Slavic linguistics, who was just writing a book actually on forms of address in Czech. And he didn't want to stick out because it was an Assistentin party as the prof. So he asked me privately in a corner not to blow his cover by addressing him as Sie. So we were on Du terms, but he was the only professor at that point with which I was on Du terms. And then I had to apply for being allowed to submit my Habilitation, which is a formal letter, and he was at that point the Dekan der Fakultät, the dean. And so we discussed how I should address him in this formal letter, which would go to the files of the faculty. You can't go back, as Horst has said, on a Du you once offered, but on the other hand, he was there in his capacity as dean. So we decided to write Spectabilis, which was his title as dean, comma, lieber Tilman, comma. So that was my letter for the Habilitation I submitted. And then one final thing on that is that the form to signal familiarity among the more conservative paper would be to leave away the professor. So after the dissertation, Professor Hans Fromm offered Christoph Huber, Herr Huber, Sie müssen nicht mehr Professor Fromm sagen, Sie können Herr Fromm sagen, which is a middle step, and which I find interesting because I've now grown used to English usage, so I'm happy with either being addressed as Henrike or as Professor Lähnemann, but I would be offended being addressed as Mrs. Lähnemann, because in an Anglophone context, it would mean somebody willfully ignoring my title. So there, this middle ground doesn't exist. But now over to Luise.
Thank you. Actually, you just mentioned what I was going to ask. I mean, there are so many things you could ask because I think it's a fascinating topic. But I was wondering about how much the English language actually has influence on the German use of pronouns, because this is where I always suspected also that this kind of addressing someone with the first name, but then using C, it always seemed to me as if it was just copying the English way of using the first name, because there you have no difference between the plural and the singular you. But I actually don't know if it was really only taken from English or if it was something that kind of developed in both languages at the same time using the first name.
Yeah, well, that's I don't know, a difficult question from say on the one hand, say very generally, a typical way of thinking about anything in language changes, it must come from English. And whatever it is, whether it's the change of word order in subordinate clauses, or whether it's the way the genitives are used with an apostrophe, or whatever, or this tones of address, people tend to think it must all come from English. And the thing is, well, that would be naive to say that because it does a change, it must have been English. On the other hand, there might, in this particular case, there might be some truth in it. The thing is, how do you prove it? You would, if you want to do this in a, say, in a systematic way, you would have to say that something. You need a laboratory situation where some people are not influenced by English, and to see whether they have the same changes, and if they're not. So the non-English influenced people, they do something, and the English influenced people do something else. Then you could see that there will be a proof that English as a contact language plays a role. Otherwise, I'd be very wary to make a statement about the actual influence of something, one language on the other. Just leading away from what you're talking about now, I'm involved with the research project on the German dialect in Namibia. And it's a completely different topic. But there, the idea is that there's Germans in Namibia, there's 20,000 people who speak German there as a native language, have been there for generations, and they have changes in their language. We're now trying to figure out where these changes come from. Is it influenced by contact language, English or Afrikaans, or is it just plain language change happening in, naturally, if you like, in any internal language change? And it's very difficult to tease out these different things. So this idea of language contact as a factor is very difficult to gauge and to really prove. One way you can approach this is by looking at behavior of non-native bilinguals, and that's actually been some research on that on our particular topic by the Melbourne people around Leo Kretzenbacher and John Hayek, who worked on how you introduce yourself at a conference, at an academic conference in another language. So, and that the idea is, for instance, that, and that actually will prove your point, or be a point in your direction, that there are German native speakers have their German system, and then they meet English speakers and they realize, oh, the English always say first names and they do it in a different way, and then they overgeneralize this. So if you look at addressing behavior at international conferences, German native speakers tend to overemphasize the first name usage in addressing somebody and in introducing somebody, because they realize this as being the non-German way as being the good English way, the informal English way, not realizing what Henrike has mentioned, that there is also the Dr. X or Professor X construction in English, quite common actually. This will be an indication that German native speakers tend to misrepresent the way the English system works, and therefore somehow overuse this in their English. What they do when they speak German again afterwards, we don't know. I don't think there's been any research on that, how this has repercussions on their own language then when they speak again. Again, that's as I said, that's difficult to investigate, how you would make a clear causal connection between using it in one way in one language and in another way in another language.
Mm. I think we'll stop recording at this point and to give the students the opportunity to ask without fear being recorded. But before I switch off the recording, many thanks, Horst, and we'll reunite after lockdown at High Table in Teddy Hall and drink to your good health. Good.
Right.